My name is Annie Carforo. My title is the Climate Justice Campaign Manager at We Act for Environmental Justice, which is a 35-year-old community-based organization that is working to improve the health and the lives of the communities in Uptown Manhattan, historically Black and environmental justice communities. So the Out of Gas In With Justice pilot was an attempt by We Act to understand the benefits and the challenges of electrification in affordable housing. We Act for a very long time has worked on issues of healthy housing, of air pollution. We know that communities of color and environmental justice communities often experience worse indoor and outdoor air pollution. So We Act wanted to understand how transitioning homes away from fossil fuels and towards electric appliances would improve indoor air quality and also quality of life. So we were looking specifically at nitrogen dioxide, which is an air pollutant that is emitted when you burn methane, which is the primary cooking fuel that we use in the United States. And that's a really important air pollutant for us to look at. There's a lot of evidence that shows that nitrogen dioxide can impact your respiratory system. So it can exacerbate diseases like asthma and other respiratory illnesses, which again is really prevalent in environmental justice communities due to the disproportionate burden of having a large number of polluting facilities located in their neighborhoods. This building that we conducted the pilot at is actually located in what's called Asthma Triangle in the Bronx, which is an area of the Bronx that is surrounded on three sides by freeways and has some of the worst asthma hospitalization rates in the city. We conducted our pilot over the course of about a year in a New York City Public Housing Authority building. And this building is going to be the New York City Housing Authority, also known as NYCHA, is going to be NYCHA's first all-electric conversion. So they are really using this building as a pilot to understand what needs to go into the renovations and the upgrades to bring our buildings into the 21st century, make sure that they are weatherized, energy efficient, and all electric. We did almost 9 months of air monitoring inside of people's homes to understand what their day-to-day air quality looked like when they had their gas stove, and then when they transitioned away from gas to an induction stove that we provided. And a really key piece of our pilot was we conducted focus groups to understand how people's experience was with this transition. Many of the folks that we were working with had never heard of an induction stove. They had cooked on gas their whole life. And so we wanted to make sure that we were capturing the challenges as well as the benefits that people were feeling when they were moving away from gas cooking towards induction. We knocked on every single door, all 96 units, and we got a lot of no's. We got a lot of, I would say wariness. People didn't really understand, what's in this for me, what's in this for you? Like, is this actually just a free new upgraded stove? I found that word of mouth and having a real trusted source going to folks and explaining the pilot to them in terms that they understand, not in, the scientific terms of air quality and air monitoring, was really key to recruitment. Once we started installing the stoves in people's apartments, that was when you could really see how, news travels fast, because we were having on multiple occasions, people call us and ask, oh, are you still recruiting for that pilot? I saw the stove. It's really great. I want one of those, which, was, I think, important to note that when people have access to these technologies, there is real interest. It's just a matter of doing it on their terms and making sure that you're respecting their needs and their wishes and their desires or interests in the process. We, like I said, monitored air quality inside people's homes. So 3 weeks total over a 9-month period. Once at the beginning of the pilot when everybody had a gas stove, once in the middle of the pilot when 10 of the homes had induction stoves, 10 of the homes had gas stoves. And once again at the end of the pilot when 10 apartments had induction stoves and 10 apartments had gas stoves. And what we measured was pretty remarkable. So when we switched out the induction stove for a gas stove, just by switching that one appliance, we actually found that nitrogen dioxide emissions inside of the homes dropped by 35%, which is really significant for just one appliance. Apartments that were cooking on gas stoves had nitrogen dioxide concentrations that were 190% higher than the apartments with an induction stove. We basically saw in households with the induction stove, there was no increase in nitrogen dioxide when the stove was on versus off, which is really, really significant because again, if you're in a small apartment that maybe doesn't have great ventilation, you're breathing in those fumes and that's hurting your health. It's hurting your respiratory system. It's hurting your lungs. It's exacerbating illnesses like asthma. So that was a really important finding for us to see that, just these minor improvements in people's homes in terms of switching out appliances can have a big impact on the air quality they're breathing. We were really happy to report that everybody that received their induction stove preferred it to their gas stove. They actually wanted to keep it instead of taking back their gas stove, which at the end of this pilot we did offer as an option. They cited so many benefits beyond just improvement to air quality. They cited ease of cooking, ease of cleaning, the speed at which the stove cooked, the quality of the cook. People thought that, their meats were coming out better. They felt much safer with the induction stove because there's no live flame, especially folks that had pets or children. There was, a really reduced risk of burning yourself on the induction stove. And so there were all of these really important qualitative benefits that we measured through this pilot. And this was really exciting because our participants ranged in age from 25 to 85. And so we were expecting a learning curve. And while some households definitely needed a little bit more help learning how to use the stove, we also saw some households, our 85-year-old participant picked up the stove like that, was cooking 3 meals a day, every day regularly on her stove, and was just so incredibly grateful that she had this opportunity. She had actually had to one time go to the hospital because she had smelled gas in her apartment and started having chest pains. And she feels such relief knowing that, that's not an option for her anymore in terms of the exposure that she's having to these air pollutants. I feel like this pilot came around during a national debate that became kind of a lightning rod related to, gas stoves. And there was, a whole bunch of people that were discrediting the research and claiming that gas stoves don't have health impacts. And, people have cooked on them for decades and they're safe. And I think that from our perspective, there really is no debate. There's over 50 years of evidence that shows that these air pollutants that gas stoves release have impacts on our health, and that there are better technology and there's better alternatives that exist. And so for us, that debate, we kind of put that aside because we were just looking at the science and we collected our own data to prove that. And now, we are really into making sure that our communities have access to these new technologies and ideally have access first because they've been impacted the most by, poor air pollution, poor living conditions, etc. I think that this pilot shows that, induction stoves are a viable alternative to gas stoves as we think about decarbonizing our buildings, and that they are really a welcomed alternative by affordable housing residents. We want to see the installation of induction stoves scale up across not just NYCHA, but housing in general. We were really thrilled this summer. NYCHA actually announced that they are working on an induction stove challenge. They want to put forth a pilot to update 100 NYCHA apartments with electric induction stoves. And so that's exactly what we wanted this pilot to kind of help. We wanted to do this on a small scale, understand the challenges of doing it, but also really measure and quantify the benefits and then be able to scale it. I think that what our pilot also showed us, which is a really important piece of this, is that these one-on-one interventions, right? Changing out one appliance for one appliance, that makes a significant difference. And we saw that and we measured that. But we need to be thinking really holistically when we think about building decarbonization, because we measured, other sources of nitrogen dioxide that were polluting the household that were beyond just the stove. We want to make sure that moving forward, NYCHA and other housing is thinking about this in a holistic sense of transitioning the entire building away from fossil fuels and doing the necessary work and maintenance to make sure that that is possible. We see a big benefit in doing this work, building by building holistically instead of kind of doing it scattered. It's going to have a bigger benefit on emissions reductions, but also a much bigger benefit for the residents of that building. There's so much that needs to change if we're going to seriously tackle our climate crisis. And I think a big thing is the way that we think about housing and the way that we think about government spending. We have lived in, an era of austerity politics. There's not enough money, there's not enough resources. And for that reason, environmental justice advocates have to fight with housing justice advocates, have to fight with education advocates for this tiny slice of, the funding pie. When the reality is, income inequality has never been greater, and we're not going to be able to make any significant changes if we're not addressing these inequalities. The transition away from fossil fuels, especially in our building sector, is going to be a massive and expensive undertaking. Just to electrify our building alone, with the estimated increases in inflation and the supply chain issues, NYCHA is anticipating it will cost anywhere from $6 million to $8 million just for this 96-unit building. We need our governments to be spending big on this transition, because public housing, affordable housing, subsidized housing, and low-income homeowners are not going to be able to do this work themselves. That doesn't mean that we should be subsidizing, corporate landlords who own thousands of units, who are going to take public subsidy and then increase rents and boot out all of the folks that have lived in those homes for decades and decades. So there needs to be a real balancing of the way that we think about spending and the way that we think about housing and quality of housing in the United States. Because in order to get our buildings off of fossil fuels, we really need to be addressing the decades of deferred maintenance that people are forced to live with, especially in rental housing. We're really pushing for radical solutions in terms of land justice, who, is controlling the land in our communities having a say in the things that are built in their neighborhoods, in the ownership models of the housing that we have. And we want to see an expansion of that and an expansion of opportunities for people to really thrive. And we want to make sure that those with the most resources are contributing fairly to this transition, because it's not going to happen by accident, and it's not going to happen fairly if we're not really acknowledging and addressing the inequalities that exist. The efforts that we're making now are critical for making sure that future generations can live and thrive in the neighborhoods that they were born in, and the ones that they want to continue to cultivate community. We need to be fighting for radical change in our city to make sure that it is livable for future generations. Communities that have been burdened for so many decades, disinvested in for so many decades, they need more resources now to make sure that they are transitioning in a way that is just and fair, and they need a voice in that transition. And so that's why We Act really is committed to doing grassroots organizing work, because we feel that it is essential that the voices that are leading this conversation are the ones that are most directly impacted by climate change and the extractive economy that we've lived in for so long that has gotten us to this point. We hope that through our work, we're not only changing policies that are going to impact people's lives, but we're also providing the resources and the education to people to get involved, have their own voice, have their own say in this movement. This isn't going to happen unless people are really demanding change. And that's why we want to be setting examples through policy, but also through these programs, where we are providing people with the opportunities to get involved, get exposed to new technologies, new ways of thinking and living, and really, spreading that word among their communities.